Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
You're muted, Peter.
Good evening, and welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. I'm your host, Peter Robbins, and we're going to get started with several thoughts before we bring on our guest tonight. One is, last weekend, I spoke at a wonderful UFO event, the Exeter, New Hampshire UFO Conference, and honorariums for our speakers and the like, goes into a central account for children's services of that entire part of New Hampshire. And as of today, we cleared $30,000. I'm very proud of everybody that I work with on that, and the fact that it was just another great festival and another great conference and another great fundraiser for the Kiwanis. Next subject, I hope I never have to bring up again, but just a strange thing that I thought I should share with you. Yesterday morning, somewhere about 8 o'clock in the morning, UK time, Greenwich Mean Time, a colleague I haven't seen in 20 years or so seemed to have learned, or thought he learned, that a colleague named Peter was either very ill or had passed away. It turned out that the person he thought it was a crop circle researcher, I believe in Wales, who in fact was just fine. But in the meantime, he called me early in the morning here on Facebook, and then started to send out discreet inquiries as to whether or not anybody knew I was still on this mortal coil. Those people concerned sent out other inquiries, and most of them tried to get in touch with me. I was up until, about 3 the morning before, so slept in and didn't even look at my mail, email, Facebook messages, texts until afternoon my time, when this had been going on for about 9 hours already. And the upshot was there were a lot of very upset people, many of whom were very upset. And I know there was no malice in this confusion, but just be careful about information that you put out that you have not validated. I spent most of yesterday responding to people individually, and I look forward to that never happening again. However, I think I can now claim that I have had a near-death experience in the minds of many other people. Next topic. And this is more serious in a way. Our guest tonight, Dr. Bruce Cornet, was somebody I scheduled, I think, first last year, screwed up that scheduling. I'm good at that. And then miraculously screwed it up again some months later. So he was scheduled to appear on August 5th, Monday, a little over a month ago. And all was good, ready to go. And some hours before the show, I received a message on Facebook. And by the way, I should tell you all right now, this is, I'm spoken with Dr. Cornet, and he's good with my introducing this subject, that he was a convicted pedophile. And here was a link to a criminal justice site in Texas, fully authentic. Very little detail, but just saying he had been arrested, convicted, tried and convicted, and had served a term in Texas. Then his conviction was overturned because not only had he been unjustly convicted, the young witness, victim, had been coerced. The person who actually did commit the crime, and there was one committed, admitted to the crime, is serving time now or has served time, and that the state of Texas gave Dr. Cornet what I consider an outrageously modest settlement for what he had been through and time served. No thank you. And he used that money to buy a house, get a car, and get back to work. And I was completely unaware of what I should do. I never faced a situation like that as a broadcaster, as a person. I thought I should not contact Dr. Cornet immediately. My producer and I got the information to the station owner, Margie Kay, and she responded that they would look into it and we would get back to Dr. Cornet. Not long after, several people who knew him and knew him well and for years contacted myself and Margie, gave us long accounts of why they felt this was absolutely impossible. And then Dr. Cornet, who of course was able to supply documentation, made it clear that, again, he had been convicted wrongly and served time wrongly. And KUNX's president's attitude was, "We are sorry for what you have been through. You are a welcome guest on any show on this network now or in the future." And so he is on tonight. However, there was a guest scheduled for this slot. We had pre-recorded that show more than a month ago. And Doug Auld and I had a very particular reason that we wanted that show aired, screened as close as possible to September 11th. It wasn't. It had to be screened that night of August 5th because we didn't have anything to put in. And because, frankly, I was beat, and Race Hobbs, my producer, was running 103 fever, and Bruce was a very good sport and allowed us to reschedule. Having taken all this time out of my guest's time with us, I'd like to go on to introduce him. Now retired, Dr. Bruce Cornet began his career as a professor of physical and historical geology with Dona Ana Branch Community College and New Mexico State University. Subsequently, he joined Pratt Whitney Aircraft Company, now known as Raytheon Technologies Corporation and Caring Electric Company. Over the years, he gained valuable experience in education, geology, and consulting, with such companies as Gulf Research and Development Company, Exxon, and others. Through his work, Dr. Cornet specialized in cases involving the Late-Triassic-Early Jurassic period, Gulf Coast overpressurized zones, the Porcupine Basin, and more. Between 1985 and his retirement in 2008, Dr. Cornet honed his experience in geological modeling, geophysical interpretation, and paleontological sampling and analysis as an independent geological consultant, postdoctoral researcher through Columbia University, a chief consulting geologist, and as a staff associate of Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. Due to his vast breadth of knowledge, he began teaching in the late 1990s, working as an MCAT instructor in 1999. Additionally, Dr. Cornet lent his considerable experience to such institutions as Lohr's Studio, the Raytheon Valley Community College, and El Paso Community College. Since retiring, he has focused his energy on writing, authoring such works as Unconventional Aerial Phenomena in the Hudson and Wallkill River valleys of New York, and a memoir. Dr. Cornet has also curated and co-curated collections for the Virginia Museum of Natural History, the Houston Museum of Natural Sciences, and Rocky Hill Dinosaur Park. While his career has been filled, what a career it's been, with highlights, he takes the most pride in winning the Context Award from the Journal of Research on Life in the Universe, serving as an integral part of the largest National Science Foundation funded continental coring project on the East Coast, which unearthed the first detailed history of Earth's climate preceding and during the early age of dinosaurs, and discovering angiosperm fossils in rocks of at least 110 million years old. The cornerstone of his success lay in an insatiable curiosity about the world. He is also a ranking scholar on the New York State Hudson Valley unconventional aircraft sightings. And Dr. Bruce Cornet, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
One correction I would like to make is that...
Make more if you want.
Or I will. But it wasn't Raytheon Community College. It was Raritan Valley Community College.
Thank you. That's a big difference.
Yes. It's one's engineering, the other is regular science.
Indeed.
Also, you started out by saying I worked in Dona Branch Community College. Somehow that got put at the beginning of the list, and that is up with my working at El Paso Community College. I worked there for many years and also taught geology there. And so at one time, not only was I working and teaching geology at 3 different colleges in the area. One was long distance on the internet, but I was also working for NIDS, National Institute for Discovery Science, and then getting involved in all the stuff that I did out in the Wallkill River Valley. Took 11 years of my life to do that, and it was an amazing events that happened in my life, something that is totally paranormal and out of most people's venue or experience.
In fact, one thing I neglected to mention, and it's rather important, is you are a lifelong experiencer yourself. And I would like to take us kind of back to the start in a way and ask you to tell us a bit about where you grew up and your childhood and your first thoughts about science as a boy.
As a boy, I had no interest in UFOs. Okay. I was fascinated by the first Sputnik satellite, Sputnik, and we even got on our roof of our house and to try to see it at that time. And but my interests were more down to earth. Instead of looking up, I was looking down at fossils in the ground. But what I didn't realize is that during that period of time, from 1953 all the way up to 1992, I had no idea, no conscious idea, that I had been abducted by non-humans and taken aboard craft. And that was the biggest shock of my life. Even when I was abducted in front of my drill crew in 1981, they all saw the ship come in, beam of light come down to the trailer where I was sleeping at night, and take me up into the saucer desk and bring me back in a beam of light. And that ship had been around the night before. And when I came to work, I stayed late because I wanted to see if it would come back, because I thought I had never seen a UFO. Okay. Yeah. And so many people in this country, in the world, are of that. And then they discover, right, because of something that, their mind is turned on to a past events that were blocked.
Yes. Yes. And
I realized that if the craft comes back, I was the president of the company, Gemini, and so I was in charge of all the mud loggers, and I told them, if it comes back, if the UFO comes back, come and get me out of bed. And they agreed to do that. Well, the events that involved my being abducted and taken are on my YouTube channel. I actually give the recording by a hypnotist that took me back to that event, and I relived it.
Good for you.
For myself, that it really did happen, just as all my drill crew described it happening.
Amazing.
So I had all of these independent people, just like Travis Walton had, and my abduction was only 6 years after his.
Bruce, I have to stop you for a moment and ask you, first, you now know, because you've made available studies and a lot of the what's now considered the most respectable work in the area of abduction research. And you and I know that what happened to you and what's happened to you is distressingly uncommon. But if somebody has just entered this show and hears you going on like this, you know, this is part of the way it is, folks. And when you said as a kid you were looking down, you and I grew up in proximity of New York City, and I'm hoping, like me, the Museum of Natural History was a part of your early childhood, because it was one of the great inspirations of my life. And that feeling as a boy of first finding a fossil and separating the two layers of rock or cracking it, and there it is. And you know you're looking at something, you know, you're 5 or 10 years old, but that's millions of years. It's an epiphany. And one of the most exciting moments I think anybody can have in that way. Your feelings about that? And do you have a moment or experiences that made you feel as a boy, this is what really interests me, this is something around what I really want to do?
As a child, I showed a lot of interest in rocks, picking up rocks. I didn't know what they were, but my mother got me a book, and I also liked dinosaurs as a child back in the 50s. And she got me a book of dinosaur discoveries in Mongolia. And I read that book from cover to cover, and I said, I want to do this when I grow up. And the fascinating thing about this is that I didn't have any experience out in the field at that time. And so when I got old enough to be in college, I joined the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, and we had a meeting at American Museum, and I was there meeting all these people and expressing my desire to get some experience, in other words, collecting fossils. And so I met Claude Hibbard, Dr. Hibbard, from University of Michigan. And he says, I run an expedition out to near Valentine, Ainsworth, Nebraska every year. Would you like to join my field crew? And
How old were you at the time?
That I would have been about 18 or 19.
Great. Continue.
And he said, yes, definitely. And I had a car at that time. I had my first Volkswagen Bug. And I drove all the way out there to see, to meet them. They had rented a house, and then in his truck, we drove out to the river, one of the branches of the Niobrara River, and we collected sand from the outcrops, and then put it out on these trays, these benches that had been made for drying tables. And then once they were dry, scoops of the material was picked up and put in these sieve boxes that are basically a square box with a screen on the bottom. And the people who were in the river would shake the boxes in the river, and so that any bones would be caught on the screen. And then they would bring the boxes back up onto the bank of the river and dump them onto white towels. And we would pick through them and find all of these small bones of rodents. And that's what Dr. Hibbard collected and studied, is the rodents from the Pleistocene, which was pretty cool. And on weekends, we went out to several collecting localities in the Oligocene, in northwestern Nebraska. And I was blown away with just how easy it was to walk out onto these clay landscapes and find bones sticking out of the rock.
Oh my gosh.
And I collected a whole bunch of them. And when I came back to Connecticut, I convinced Yale University to pay for my trip if I donated all the fossils I found. And I took another friend from UConn, and we went out there the next summer and spent weeks out there. And I have wonderful pictures. And boy, what I found the most complete skeleton of Delphinocyon dodgii. It was a dog-like animal, and it was just beginning to erode out of the clays. And we collected the whole thing, and it was prepared at Yale and put on exhibit in the mammal hall.
Oh, what a feeling. How old would this dog-like creature have been?
About 40 million years, 35 to 40 million years old. And it really did look like it had the dentition of a dog, but it had a very small cranium behind the eye sockets. And then that was what has amazed me, is that you would find these casts of the brains of these mammals that lived at that time, just washing out onto the surface after rains. Wow. Anyway, that was the best experience that I've ever had out there. And it got me really started on collecting fossils. I became meticulous at putting these skeletons back. We came across a little rodent, it was an insectivore called Ictops. And it was sticking out of the ground. And Hibbard was there and says, "No, we got to go back to our house. We spend enough time." And I said, "Oh, how am I going to, this is going to take hours to collect." So I asked him for a shovel, and I came over and I shoved the shovel into the clay and dumped it into a bucket. When I got home, I put it through a sieve, collected all the thousands of bones, and meticulously glued them all back together again. And that skeleton is on, in the collection of Yale University.
That takes a special kind of patience, as well as, of course, a very important, a complete knowledge of the anatomy of the creature that you're putting together. And it's such a delicate process. It's not like assembling a brontosaurus or something in major museum.
No, this animal was only about that long. It was tiny, and it had a very strange snout on it. And I went to Harvard, and I asked the paleontologists there if they had any ictops, and they said, "Oh yes." And they showed me their collection, and I said, "Wow, this is great. This is what it looks like." So I had a model of what it should look like, and put it back together. Excellent. But on that trip, I also found the skull of a Titanothere. Have you ever heard of that name? It was
the animal that's still around, a tapir?
No, a Titanothere, because it was the size of an elephant or a rhinoceros, and it had these split horns coming out of its snout. And I found the skull right there washing out, and I prepared it out and brought it back, along with a whole bunch of more casts of other animals' skeletons we had found.
And I have to ask you, because I am always particularly interested in how people who have distinguished themselves in different fields literally became those people. When you were really a boy in elementary school, picking up rocks and that wow, this is an ancient creature in this one. Was there a particular adult that encouraged you, or maybe a parent or a teacher, or was there anything, how can I say, that added to the impetus of your drive to have a career in which part of your career, paleontology?
Right, there was something. It turns out that the main courthouse of Connecticut, the capital, in their library downstairs, they had hundreds of pamphlets of books published by 19th century paleontologists that had collected throughout the Connecticut Valley. Wow. And I bought them all up. and I was seeing all the amazing things that they'd found. Of course, they didn't have photographs back then; they just had drawings, and it gave me the idea that there were a lot of fossil fish and dinosaur tracks in the Connecticut Valley. So I wanted to find some for myself. And in 1967, I borrowed my brother's Honda motorcycle. And I'd worked at Pratt Whitney Aircraft, and a friend there had given me a Geiger counter. And I want to go out and test the rocks. So I drove all the way up to Massachusetts from West Hartford, Connecticut. And they were opening up I-91 through the side of Mount Tom.
Oh, boy.
And it was a fresh cut into the side. And when I went along there, these beautiful layers of rock just were so impressive. I have photographs of them that are even on my websites. But I started checking with the Geiger counter to see if there's anything unusual going on. And I found one layer, and it was just very hot. So what is going on here? So I started digging in it, and out fell all these fossil fish, beautiful fossil fish. And every fossil fish, the subholosteans and holosteans, was radioactively hot.
Oh my
Very
God.
hot. They were all hot.
What do you think accounted for that?
I wanted to find out, and I had been working and earning good money at Pratt & Whitney. I built a wet chemical lab in my mother's basement.
Damn.
Now, if the police knew that I had that today, you darn well know that they would have raided my parents' house. Okay, but I got a minor in chemistry. So I wanted to analyze all the rocks that I got, and I did. I dissolved them and I analyzed them for content and quality and all this. And I took those fish and I dissolved them, and I ran them through a series of tests to find out what mineral or what element was radioactive. And what it keyed out to be in my book was radioactive cesium. Cesium is highly deadly. I didn't know this at the time. I was handling these fish, and I got all of this powder at the bottom of my Erlenmeyer flask that was radioactive, and I didn't think anything else about it. And I told my friend Paul Olson, who was in high school at that time, about this, and he's the one who got a job with Columbia University as a professor. He's a tenured professor there now. And he hired me to help him out there at Lamont Doherty from 1988 to 1993. And he liked my work so much that he hired me as the wellsite geologist for the largest coring program ever paid for or financed by National Science Foundation, to the millions of dollars. And Amoco brought in its rigs, and we cored 7 4,000-foot holes and pulled out 28,000 feet of core. And I was the one who had to describe every inch of those cores. And I couldn't.
No long-term effects of the radiation as far as...
No, as far as I know. But those fish, Paul says, are somewhere in Yale University's drawers in their basement.
Hopefully steel, well, whatever they're supposed to be in,
Right.
lead. My first thought, of course, is, well, obviously, nuclear war on the fish 60 million years ago or something, but maybe not.
Well, we do have Dr. John Brandenburg in his work on Mars, coming up with the fact that Mars had been nuked. He thinks about 500,000 years ago, and that's why it doesn't have an atmosphere similar to the Earth anymore. And so, but getting back to the fish, I did the palynology of all of the rocks up and down the East Coast. It took me 5 years to uh, do that, collect the samples, dissolve them in the lab, and make pollen slides out of them and study them under the microscope. And I was able to complete my thesis amazingly in just 5 years. And it's over 500 pages long. And I was able to date all of the rocks up and down the East Coast. And those rocks that I first found with the fossil fish turned out to be Jurassic in age, not Triassic. All of the rocks up and down the East Basin were called the Triassic basins. And the maps the USGS published showed no Jurassic age rocks on land. On the seafloor, yes, but
Bruce, explain to our viewers and listeners what that real difference is in time, and were your findings credible enough, or even acknowledged enough to have affected the way these periods are referred to, and the way this part of history is recorded?
Yes, after my thesis was published, the USGS had to redo all of its maps of the East Coast because I found significant quantities of Jurassic age rocks that were older than the marine rocks or the basalts on the Atlantic Ocean floor, which are all Jurassic.
So what would have been the difference in time that the error was reflecting?
About 10 million years was missing.
Oh, well.
But they had the gap. They had a gap between the oldest Jurassic basalts on the continental shelf and then the Triassic basins, which they thought were all Triassic. So where was the connection? And what I found in my thesis is that you have about 6 or 7 million years of Jurassic in the basins on top of all the Triassic. So it was the top of the rock column that was matched the sea beds under the Atlantic Ocean.
It seems to me this has to be a remarkable acknowledgement for a living scientist, and very satisfying, not in any way to thumb your nose at the establishment, but to discover a legitimate error and move to correct it and see the correction done. That's pretty...
What is fascinating is that back in the 1800s, there was great debate as to what the age of the Triassic rift basins were. And there were progressive, I call them, geologists who said, no, the fish we're finding at the top of the section look more like Jurassic fish that they're finding in France. And so we think that the basins at the top are Jurassic. And the Triassic rocks won out. All of the vertebrate paleontologists say, no, all we find are Triassic reptiles and dinosaurs in these rocks. No Jurassic age dinosaurs. Well, now they've found them. I mean, one of the things I found in my thesis when I went down the sequence from the youngest Jurassic to the oldest Triassic, right at about 201 million years in radiometric age, there was a mass extinction. And nobody had known this, that there was a mass extinction separating the Triassic from the Jurassic. And that's one of the biggest contributions to my thesis, is that this opened up a whole new avenue of research. And then other geologists and paleontologists were discovering, oh, we've got the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction over here in this continent and in that continent. And they were finding, and what happened at that point in time, and which is amazing, is underneath that boundary, we had a very diverse flora based on the spores and pollen. I mean, very rich flora of tropical ferns and trees and conifers and all different types of plants that suddenly, overnight, disappeared at that boundary, wiped out. And there was a coal layer that was deposited in some areas that is made up of fern remains. And then later on, they found at the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary, similar mass extinction. Of course, we know that came about from an asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs.
And what do you credit this other mass extinction the cause of?
Good question. They wanted my colleagues wanted to make it a bolide impact, okay? And well, they couldn't find anyone with the same age date that matched the 201 million years. It was a mystery. And what I didn't realize at the time is that trip up to Mount Tom with my Geiger counter would figure into this in a major way.
How so?
Because something caused that radiation. A gamma spike radiation that came from a supernova somewhere out in space and whacked the Earth. Now, what is fascinating is, and I didn't realize the significance of all this until the Chinese started publishing papers on the Triassic-Jurassic boundary in China. And guess what? There's no mass extinction there. So on the opposite side of the Earth from where I was doing my geology, there was a mass extinction, and the vegetation changed overnight. And you can look at the dinosaur tracks right at the boundary.
But the event never occurred on the other side of the Earth.
No, because there was disturbance in the flora and fauna, okay, as you would expect, but nothing was wiped out so completely. And we wondered how in the world the flora recovered so quickly on our Atlantic side of the Earth, and that's because it was not extinguished on the Pacific side of the Earth. And what I did with that, I realized that we need to look more closely at the dinosaur tracks. Paul Olson, who has his expertise in studying the dinosaur tracks, said that, and he did a graph, and I saw this at one of his talks. I said, oh my God, I got to get a copy of that graph, because right at the boundary, he shows the dinosaur tracks suddenly increasing by 50% in size.
Whoa.
50%, and that boundary marks the beginning of the age of the dinosaurs.
And about what time frame do we have that this transition in size occurred?
A matter of a foot. And in the sediments. So the big question is, what caused something of this magnitude in size of the dinosaurs? Because then you go into the early Jurassic on the East Coast, in the Connecticut Valley, and the Newark Basin of New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and you find larger dinosaur tracks in the Jurassic everywhere. And that's when you got your large carnosaurs and your precursors to Tyrannosaurus and all of that, and the large herbivorous four-footed dinosaurs and long necks. Got all of those suddenly coming into the picture almost overnight. How is that possible? Of course, most credible scientists will not want to speculate on that, even though you have the answer right there in front of you. Radiation. The Atlantic side of the Earth was radiated. Not only that, but the energy that coming from this gamma spike that hit the Earth heated up the mantle underneath, that down to 20 to 30 miles. It was that powerful. And guess what happened? It caused the mantle to melt.
Whoa.
And right after that, Africa and North America started to pull apart, and all of this magma came up from deep within the crust and flooded all the Triassic basins up and down the East Coast. And you have lava flows lying on top of the Triassic offshore. I mean, I worked for Gulf and saw their seismic maps and well records drilling into the continental shelf, and sure enough, it goes all the way out there. You can see that that there was this huge amount of volcanism, and they call it the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. It's so big. It's as big as the Siberian traps in Russia. As another time when the similar event occurred, but much younger. And this one at the Triassic-Jurassic boundary came with a matter of 20 to 30 feet on top of the Triassic-Jurassic boundary, the mass extinction that I documented in the sediments. That they wanted to make it as a result of the extinction, but no, it actually occurs a little bit because you had to heat up the rocks and melt the rocks and have them come up through fractures and fissures and spread out into the basins. But you go up into Connecticut or northern New Jersey, and you'll find all of the trapped rocks of the ridges up there are made from lava flows that are sticking out of the ground.
You remind me, and it's kind of in a microcosm, but similar principle. I've been to as close as possible to the exact site where Travis Walton and the men he was with confronted this craft and where he was taken. And many, decades later, we go back and there are, the site is preserved, the location is preserved as much as possible, because the last thing anybody wants is for it to become a tourist destination. It's in wilderness area. But here's the thing, Bruce, and it's been certainly published before and photographs are out, but to be there and see it, there are still several tree trunks within 50, 70 feet of where this happened that had been cut.
They form a circle. And one side of them is enlarged. The tree rings are enlarged from the other side.
As much as 3 times as wide, all facing the area that it's one thing to understand that simple, even for a layperson, that radiation can affect growth one way or the other. It can kill you off.
We also have the Russian nuclear spill.
Chernobyl, where, yes, much of the foliage and animal life
have the same expansion of growth rings, exactly. So radiation can do horrible things to biological organisms. But what was significant to me is that you can explain the camp, the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, and the radiation, and the Triassic-Jurassic boundary extinctions, all by the concept that one side of the Earth was whacked really hard by a energetic rays coming from probably some sort of there are different terms for it. Supernova or mini nova. They give various ideas about what could have happened, but we see that only half the Earth really got hit hard, and the other half survived.
I don't know anybody that has ever even suggested that to me. Not that it's my field, but it's self-evident that something like that could happen. And yet, again, I never thought about it, but here's a situation that you come into as a scientist and you're able to help crack the understanding open. And again, that must be a satisfying experience and have knowledge by your... It
was. But you have to consider this. I'm not trying to take credit for all of this because the rocks were out there. The evidence was out there. Just it required somebody to go out and dig it up and to study it. And that was my contribution. But there was another thing that happened, Peter, that is perhaps I consider this the biggest discovery of my entire paleontological career. It is the one that has gotten the least recognition by my colleagues because many of them are very angry with me for having made these discoveries. Have you ever heard of the concept of the early Cretaceous radiation of flowering plants?
No.
It's called, Darwin labeled it the abominable mystery, because in his fossil collections back there in the 1800s, he could trace angiosperm fossils of the flowering plants, which are the dominant seed plants on Earth today. He could trace them in the fossil record all the way back to the Aptian Albion, which is about 100 million years ago. Okay, in the mid Cretaceous or early or late early Cretaceous, and there was a big question at Harvard, and Elso Barghorn, who was the professor who had many students in paleobotany and palynology, pushed the idea, along with Scott and other paleontologists, that the reason you don't find any older angiosperms is because that is where they first evolved. So this idea that the oldest angiosperms are Aptian, or maybe a Neocomian, late Neocomian in age, a little bit older, got stuck into the thinking of many paleontologists, even vertebrate paleontologists that I had to argue with that knew nothing about fossil plants, would say, no, there are no pre-Cretaceous angiosperms. Okay? Now, I didn't know what I was going to find or discover from this. This was just outrageous. I had to study all the basins up and down the East Coast, and there were about 8 or 9, 10 basins that I had to go to and dig in. And the Richmond Basin, just south of the city of Richmond, was the first Triassic basin, one of the earliest to form, and it had massive coal measures in the bottom part of the sequence. And it was the area of the first coal mining of the 13 colonies. And they even had railroad tracks that came to those mine entrances to take the coal out. And during the Civil War, that was where the South got most of its coal, from those mines. And of course, you know who were the miners. I don't think I need to mention that, right? But those mines are all closed down, but there are spoil piles of rocks that they dug out and just piled up onto the surface. And so I went down there and I collected the right type of rocks that would have fossils in them and processed them in the laboratory to see what types of spores and pollen the coal strata had. And one of the first things I found were angiosperm pollen. Wait a minute. My advisor at Penn State was a student of Professor Elso Bargehorn at Harvard. Okay. And he was believed that there are no pre-Cretaceous angiosperms. Okay. So I had an advisor who, you have a stick in the mud that I had to get around to be able to convince the world that they were wrong.
Explain to us exactly what an angiosperm is and why the establishment, so to say, held that there were none in this material that you were analyzing.
First off, angiosperm is distinguished from the non-angiosperm seed plants, the conifers, gymnosperms, by the fact that the seeds and the ovules are enclosed within an ovary inside the flower. Pine cones have naked seeds and ovules in the bracts of the pine cone bracts, and what we didn't have any easy sequence of ancestors that could take us back to the ancestor of the angiosperm before the Cretaceous, and they thought that the angiosperms had to have just appeared out of nowhere almost. And the several ancestral types that are gymnosperms have been thought of, but more recent work with genetics has shown that none of them, like the Natales, are ancestors of the angiosperms. But Darwin was able to take those fossils of gymnosperms and find ancestors back in the Paleozoic 200 to 300 million years ago. That he was able to follow their ancestors all the way back to the early seed plants, but not the flowering plants. Flowering plants also have evolved a very elaborate, showy petals on their flowers to attract insects to assist in pollination, as you know. And so when I found angiosperm pollen in these rocks, I showed my advisor, And his first question was, it's got to be contamination, recent contamination. It looked too much like a perfect angiosperm pollen. It had a very distinctive reticulum on the outer layer that was supported by little rods or columelli that supported it on an index sign, and it had multiple furrows or apertures on it, like that of angiosperm pollen. And when the word got out to those in the paleobotanical community, and it was like the shot heard around the world for paleobotanists. They immediately said, "Oh no, it's got to be contamination." Bruce is, he doesn't know how to distinguish. And Dr. Doyle, James Doyle from Harvard, published a paper with Hickey on what distinguishes angiosperm pollen from gymnosperm pollen. And it turned out that all of the characteristics that my pollen had in the Triassic were identical to what he had identified as making these pollen grains angiosperm pollen. But they couldn't believe it because it was over 100 million years older than their oldest fossil leaf from the Cretaceous. So, make a long story, I could take this out. This is a big part of my career in finding this. They said, Bruce, pollen is but one organ of the plant. It's not the rest of the plant, even though it's one of the most important organs.
Sure.
It doesn't tell us what produced it. You're going to have to find that out before we're going to believe or accept your ideas. Then, of course, we had a palynologist at the University of Massachusetts, Walker, Jim Walker, who liked to slice up fossil angiosperm pollen and look for the structure of the inner layer within the pollen wall. And he did some of my grains. I sent them on to him because they were very interested in seeing what they look. And they came back non-laminated. In other words, without laminations in the index side. And that was a key characteristic of angiosperm pollen. So that really blew everybody's mind. They didn't want to admit it. And then they kept on saying, well, you got to find the plant. So at about that time, a paleobotanist by the name of Dr. Sid Ash out in Utah, he had found a locality for well-preserved San Miguelia leaves in Sunday Canyon, Texas. Now, the original plant called San Miguelia lewisii was described by Brown in the 50s, and he called it a Triassic palm. Now, this really irritated those who believe that angiosperms evolved in the Cretaceous, because how can you have a Triassic palm in the Triassic 100 million years older without any intervening plants to bridge the lineage? And so I convinced a couple of my paleontological friends, vertebrate paleontologists, to have a field trip out to Sunday Canyon. And we got out there. I took a week off from college, and I mean, not from work, I should say. And I got out there to the Sunday Canyon on the last day of our trip. And then we had to go turn around and come home. And I found the locality that Sid Ash had found, and I found pieces of San Miguel leaves. Now, what was significant here is that most localities that produce this fossil in the Southwest only produce impressions in reddish mud layers. Well, these layers were gray, and they contained well-preserved cuticle, leaf cuticle, and stem cuticle in the rocks. And so my friends and I started excavating into the side of this hillside, and we found an entire community of this plant growing in situ. All of this, the roots, stems, inflorescences, flowers, seeds, you name it. It was all there, beautifully preserved. And we collected that material, and I brought it back to Houston, where I worked at Gulf Research and Development, and worked on it for decades.
And we're going to have to hold that thought for a moment. Bruce, can you give us your websites where people can learn more about your work and what you're doing?
Okay. All right. Can you put that on your webpage later?
If you say it out loud, I think we can make it magically appear in the crawl as we move into the second half of the show. Otherwise, Peter Robbins here, my special guest, Dr. Bruce Cornet. Meanwhile, here on Earth, see you in 4.
This September 6th through the 13th, join with like-minded souls in the experience of a lifetime on the Royal Caribbean Ovation of the Seas as we travel from Seattle to Alaska. Internationally renowned researchers, investigators, experiencers, authors, holistic healers, contactees, spiritual luminaries will sail on an extraordinary voyage of transformation. This cruise will explore UFOs, alien contact, cover-ups, ancient mysteries, the paranormal, holistic healing, and spirituality. Experience engaging lectures, one-on-one sessions, private, custom-tailored excursions, and a nightly UFO watch. The cruise is booking up fast. Go to contactatsea.com and be sure to mention the UNX Network when you book. That's contactatsea.com or phone 336-749-1219. That's 336-749-1219.
The UNX Network annual XCon is just around the corner, so get your tickets now. XCon is being held October 11th to the 13th, 2024 at the very haunted Oasis Hotel and Convention Center in Springfield, Missouri. Speakers include Scott Nelson, Peter Robbins, Micah Hanks, Mindy Taubfest, Debbie Ziegelmeyer, Dan Terry, Michelle Roos, and more, presenting UFOs, cryptids, and the paranormal. Attend a live ghost hunt and workshops at the hotel. And we're having the annual awards banquet and Mad Hatter costume party. You don't want to miss this conference. Visit unxnetwork.com to register today. That's unxnetwork.com. This is Margie Kay, and I'd like to say thank you to all of our KUNX show hosts, staff, listeners, and viewers for making us #1 on Paranormal Talk Radio.
While most near-death experiencers return to this plane of existence with alluring tales of their time spent in the presence of the divine, what happens when one crosses the veil into the afterlife, into the void? In the new book, Dying to Meet Them, Mindy Taubfest describes her journey to the afterlife after a devastating aneurysm, how a strange turn of events would lead her to spiritual growth, divine healing, UFO experiences, and a greater understanding of the universe. Get your copy of Dying to Meet Them today at Amazon.com or visit unxmedia.com for more information on this book and more amazing selections from UNX Media Publishing at unxmedia.com.
Meanwhile, here on Earth is the program. Peter Robbins, your host, that's me, and my special guest tonight, Dr. Bruce Cornet. I wanted to just go back to the top of the hour, my thoughts on several things. I didn't complete one thought, which is I mentioned my guest who was going to be on tonight, and that was a pre-recorded show with Doug Ault. There's his handsome face. Doug is, again, a painter, a composer, a pianist, a UFO experiencer, a ufologist, and this is just part of his output. It was a series of 100 oil paintings of whistleblowers, many in UFO work, but otherwise in government and industry. He also did a remarkable series of paintings of people who had experienced burn injuries and elevated the dialogue extraordinarily on what they go through, and tremendous character, and how they move forward in life. Some of his paintings here as well. All you have to do is simply go to YouTube, type in "Meanwhile Here on Earth," Doug Auld, Doug and AULD, and he's there. Statement finished. Race, bring back tonight's guest. Whoa.
Thank you for being patient with me here, Peter. I thought I lost you.
No, not at all. I want to start the hour by saying your book, Aerial
Phenomena in the Hudson and Wallkill River Valley of New York.
It's not just another UFO book. It's a work of real scholarship, Bruce. Your in-depth investigation into this subject, the amount of evidence you include, the documentation. For somebody like me, it's very satisfying to read. And for anybody who wants to enter a quality case history, no nonsense, and a credentialed presenter as the author, it's really one to add to your library. I'm very pleased to have it, and may we see more books from you. But
did you get my URL for my website?
No,
it went black.
Yeah, I'm a little overtired tonight.
Okay.
But we will have that. And I wanted to go back to another part of your life story, and it parallels mine in a tiny, mine being the tiny example, yours being the lifelong, which is having a profound UFO sighting, multiple sighting with my sister Helen when we were kids growing up on Long Island. That was quite so overwhelming that I repressed the memory, and rather successfully. It was, there were a few moments in my life where it started to reveal itself, but it was a full 14 plus years before it came roaring back. And in that time, my sister had not spoken to me about her memory. Indeed, she remembered the same thing I did, and it was our first opportunity for her to tell me about some of her abduction-related memories. This almost 50 years ago, at a time when I had no point of reference, and it was life-changing for me. And for you, it's apples to oranges and a bunch of light years. But in the window that I got in on the lives of abductees and experiencers, aside from my own research in the many years I worked with and for Bud Hopkins, certainly through several hundred large and small investigations, gave me an appreciation of the fact that your profile, in that sense, a dispassionate term, it's extraordinarily common. And it happens, and then something in later life, maybe it's that you're ready to deal with it, but it comes back. And I want to go back to that time, Bruce, when you're living your life, you're a grown-up, you have a career, you have outside interests, and something triggers this memory, this one of your memories. And what was the trigger, and what was the result in your life at that moment?
Two things happened. One on March 23rd of 1981, and I remember that because I was on a church bus coming back to Houston from a retreat on the coast, and I was sitting alone in my seat, and this voice started talking to me, and I looked around, and there was nobody looking at me or close enough to be that voice. And the voice said, now keep in mind, I was at a Baptist retreat, okay? So put that in proper context. And the voice said, are you ready to serve God and do whatever he asks you to do? Oh, wait a minute. Holy cow. I had been through a marriage and was recovering from that. And I had discovered these fossils in Sunday Canyon. And interestingly enough, I make it Sunday Canyon because It was on Easter that I just made the actual discovery, or the big discovery, the day after on the Sunday, which was just mind-boggling. And San Miguelia means Saint Michael, and you know who Saint Michael is, right? So here was a fossil plant from the Triassic. It was approximately 220 million years old, and it was named by Brown, who discovered it in the southwest corner of Arizona, or no, Colorado.
Okay.
And he called it he named it after the river it was found in, which was San Miguel River. So it was pretty much a setup, if you will. If things can happen in this world that are intended to go in certain directions, this was one of them. And my discovery of the well-preserved fossils of this, and when I worked this plant out, I found it had beautifully preserved carpels and ovules inside the carpels. It had beautifully preserved anthers and pollen in the anthers. So it had all of the key characteristics that define an angiosperm. And would you believe that I've actually talked to some of my colleagues who believe that there are no pre-Cretaceous angiosperms? And I said, well, what do you think about my paper? Because I wrote 2 different papers on this plant. He says, I didn't read your paper. What do you mean?
Well.
Didn't read my paper? Oh my God, that would be the first thing to do. He didn't want his opinion to be, changed. So
willful ignorance, with respect, to not expose yourself to information that might cause a change of mind that would reflect on maybe the way people perceive you in your career. What a tragic kind of narrative curve that is, and how common.
Right. And those people who had pushed the Cretaceous origin of the angiosperms for decades, ever since Barkhorn, they still haven't changed in their minds. And I said, well, there are no pre-Cretaceous angiosperms. I said, well, what about the fossil pollen I found at the type section of the Oxfordian, late Jurassic, in France? And I published a paper with Daniel Habib on that, and beautiful lily pollen in the late Jurassic, when angiosperms are not supposed to have existed based on these experts. So where are we right now? Where was I at the top? Oh, yes, you asked about what things got me going.
Triggered the memory.
Triggered stuff. Now, that was in 1981 that I... or 1980 that I found the San Miguel. We went up there, and then I had the calling on a church bus in 1981, and it wasn't until December 15th of 1983 that I would meet the woman, because the voice said, there is somebody who needs help. If I bring her to you, will you help her? No, wait a minute. If you could assume that I was talking to God or an angel of God, and that this entity would bring this woman to me that I would help.
Were you taking all of this quite literally? At this point in your life, were you following a Baptist path, so to say, or this was the religion you were born into, or how deeply involved were you, and were you seeing this more through a spiritual matrix or a scientific one?
I was very open-minded at the time, because I was ready to settle down with my first wife. And I need to explain a little bit about that too, and how this has would really pull the rug out from under my feet. Okay.
Yeah, please.
I was a student at the University of Connecticut, and in May of 1969, it was the first warm day we had as it was going into spring. And I decided to take a different path walking to class. And it took me across this large campus lawn with a pond on it. And as I crossed it, I saw this woman sitting on a blanket. And I saw off to the side another man walking around the margin of the pond. And I heard the woman yell at the man, and he didn't respond. Then she got up. She started walking towards me. Before I could get across the lawn to my class building, she stopped me and said, "Hi, my name is Bonnie Nathan. Would you like to feel my baby move?"
Well,
She
what a
was,
way to meet somebody.
yes, she was 7 months pregnant, and she took my hand and put it on her belly. Her baby was the first time he's starting to move, and she wanted to share it with her husband. Obviously, he wouldn't respond. She got pissed off. So she came and chose me, a total stranger. And we exchanged some information. She was about 18 years old, very beautiful. And I walked on to class, and I was waiting for the teacher to arrive along with the other students in my class. And there was another class on the other side of the hall waiting for their teacher. And I saw this pretty girl, and I had the courage. I mean, that gave me some courage as a shy male. And I walked over and introduced myself to this young girl. Didn't realize who she was, that she was a freshman. And I started a conversation. And then when their classes started, she had to go. And I said, "Well, can we get together afterwards?" She said, "Yes." And we met. She became my first wife. The woman I met who wanted me to feel her baby move became my second wife. Wow. Now, Bonnie, when I met her, she had been flown down to Houston, and she was living with her estranged husband who didn't want her because he'd gotten a job with NASA, and he didn't want to have all the added expense. He had deserted her up in Collingswood, New Jersey, and she just ran out of luck, and he agreed that, come down to Houston and bring Chucky, their son. He thought that she was going to die, and he thought that he would get his son, okay, in the custody, because Bonnie had the custody of their son. And she got her brother-in-law to help him paint an office building where my dentist had his office. And I had an invitation from that dentist, as did all of his patients, for a Christmas party. And on the 15th of December in 1983, I went to that Christmas party, and I parked next to this truck, and these two people were loading paint cans and brushes in the back of that truck. And the woman asked me what was going on. I said, "Well, there's a Christmas party." She loved Christmas parties. She crashed the party. And I saw her, and she told me to come over and talk to her. She recognized me. And she said, she gave me a piece of paper with her phone number on it. She said, "Call me." And I did after the party the next day, and found out her situation, that she had was recovering from major surgery of 3 cancers she had gotten. Breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and Clark's spreading version of malignant melanoma, in which a large part of her left thigh had been removed to take the tumor out. And she was disabled, obviously, and walked with a crutch or cane. And we got to talking and realizing that we had met before. Imagine me realizing that I had met her on the University of Connecticut campus 14 years earlier. And she told me how her first husband killed her in a fit of rage one morning when he thought she was cheating on him, and kicked her in the small of the back, rupturing her kidney. And she's witnessed her being taken to the emergency room, and they couldn't save her. And she saw her body with a sheet on it being rolled into the morgue. And then the young intern who tried to save her came to the morgue to pray for her. And this was probably 10, 12 hours later. And as she was watching him in spirit, she said, he started to cry, and his tears began falling onto her face because he's so upset that such a young, beautiful woman was dead in his morgue. And so she said, I couldn't bear to see him cry for me. And she entered her body and resurrected it right there.
Let me stop you for a moment and ask you again, as an analytical thinker, but also as somebody with a religious background, how did you process that in the moment?
I had to just listen to it, accept what she was saying, because she had already told me that she was very psychic, precognitive, had all of these special powers. She could move objects with her mind, and she did. She could see into the future, which she did. She proved that to me numerous times. She was clairvoyant. She knew what everybody else was doing. She knew things in advance. And she said that I can't wear an electric watch because when I'm in a good mood, the time increases, and when I'm in a bad mood, it slows down. And she said, I had a ice maker in my freezer in the kitchen. And she said, I'm having the most difficult time with this ice maker because it's automatically fed and produced ice cubes. She said, when I was happy and the ice maker made more ice than could be held by the freezer, and it would pop the freezer door open and all the ice would fall out on the floor.
Bruce, did your relationship with her in some way help to trigger this memory of your first memory of contact with these other intelligences?
It was there because, she died in the same town I lived in, right next to the UFO hotspot.
Oh, my.
Yeah. And she is buried in a Garden of Texas Liberty in Northwest Houston, which is a triangular area dedicated to the families that fought in the Mexican-Texas War. And she was given a crypt along with me in that special place that had an obelisk in the center, surrounded by an 8-column marble temple. And I was still, pretty slow at picking up on a lot of this stuff. Right 2 weeks before she died, she put a suitcase at the bottom of the bed. She knew when she was going to die. She knew exactly when. In fact, she had her wedding dress. She was married on her 36th birthday 4.5 years earlier. And she had it designed to exactly like the place she was going to be buried in the Garden of Texas Liberty. Same shape and pattern. And later after she died, I began realizing all of this stuff. And she came back and talked to me, just like you and I are having a conversation, but even though I couldn't see her. Now, that would be pretty hard for me to just say, no, this is ridiculous, I'm going crazy. No, but she told me things that were just absolutely blew my mind. Any rate, coming up to the end of when she died on the 12th of January, 1991, she moved into my house on the 12th of January, 1984, and she was killed by her husband on the 12th of January, 1971. All 12, 12, 12. And strangely enough, she had put a suitcase at the end of the bed, intending me to see it. And I asked her, what is this? She says, I'm going back to Texas. This was her way of saying, I'm going to die soon, and you're going to take my body back and bury it in Texas. And then to make sure that the connection was there, I was working late at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, working on the various projects. And when I came home, I was too tired to fix her a meal. She was pretty much bedridden by that time. So I'd stop off at McDonald's and get something for us. And that first time I walked into the condominium, and she said, yelled out from the bedroom, "Hi, honey. Did you get me my Big Mac with extra pickles and Coke with extra ice? And that's what I was carrying. I walked into the bedroom and I handed it to her. I said, how did you know? She said, I asked you for them. And I began to realize that when I ordered that, there was a thought in my head. Hamburger with extra pickles and Coke with extra ice. So I got her that again, and she would you say, hi, Bruce, did you get me my, Big Mac with extra pickles, etc.? And I said, yes, it's right here. And I tried to trick her a couple times, and no, that's the thought that I had in my head. So I realized that she was communicating with me. Why? Because when she died, she wanted me to know that she was talking to me, that her voice was in my head. It wasn't my illusion, or it wasn't fake.
Bruce, what was the memory that finally came up? The first, I imagine, of a number, but the first memory of contact when you were younger.
Okay. I was in the last year in elementary school.
Ah.
Okay. And the teacher had invited a cameraman from the local TV studio. Televisions were all brand new at that time.
Uh-huh.
Okay. This was, I believe, 1954. Sorry, 1954.
Yeah.
And he wanted to demonstrate to the students how television worked.
Great.
And one of the students said, what happens if you point the camera at the monitor? And he said, you'll get a feedback loop in the screen. And so the student said, could you do that? Show us it. And when he did it, it was like deja vu for me. I've seen this before. Where have I seen this? Suddenly, the screen memory that blocked my memory of an abduction a year before flooded back. And I remember standing with about 10 to 12 other young children my age, inside the hallway of a UFO or disc. And we were surrounded by grays and a tall gray. And they took us individually into an examining room and put me on this table. And then they had this X-ray machine slide over my head and imaged my head. And I didn't know why. But it had happened the year I'd been abducted a year before, when they put this implant into my head, and this was the time that
where was the implant located?
Where my optic nerve crosses between my eyes.
Okay.
Right at the optic chiasma, and the teacher, the doctor there, wanted all of us to know how it worked. So he divided us up into pairs and had us go to the separate rooms along the side wall of this craft. And the wall was curved like that.
Oh, boy.
And we went into these side rooms, and they all were basically computer terminals. And what I saw there, I realized, I didn't want to realize it, but it didn't quite match the early computers. It matched a flat screen computer with a keyboard. Okay? This was 1954. And we didn't manufacture those then.
No, we didn't.
And the teacher instructed the technician, which was a small gray, to turn to key into the frequency of the person next to me, and I saw whatever he was seeing on that screen. It robs a small circle of information from both my eyes on my periphery of my eyesight. And then when he switched it to me, he said, I was told, you won't see anything when you look at the monitor because, you're the camera. And that's all I saw was this feedback loop on the monitor, and that's what I saw in the classroom when they pointed the TV camera at the monitor, and that's what triggered my memory. Then I told my doctors, and they scheduled a CAT scan of my brain and found the little BB right there at the optic chiasm. And they did an eye exam and found the two missing areas, circular areas in my peripheral vision, where information is stolen by that BB and sent to a terminal aboard a ship.
Bruce, how did the professionals deal with, or what did they say to you about finding this BB-sized object in your brain? And by the way, it's certainly not the first one I've heard of or am aware of.
Oh, they weren't clued in at all. It was like their mind was blocked. Well, that's interesting, and went on to something else. The thought process was interfered with, clearly, because for me, it was my BB, my implant, and I was fascinated. One of the things that I learned to recognize is that when I was with Bonnie, she was very psychic, had a tremendous amount of psychic energy about her. And I discovered that if I rotated or moved my eyes back and forth with my eyelids closed, those two areas that where the BB is lit up like rings of fire, beautiful rings of fire in my vision. And it was where the optic nerves wrap around that BB and are stimulated by its energy.
As you said at the top, the subject of UFOs never interested you as a kid. Me neither. Did you intuit that this memory, the grays, the large gray, the small grays in the hallway, my sister's memory exactly, but on her own without other kids, that this was directly connected to a flying saucer? Was this the very first time you gave this some thought? And if so, did you then start to pursue learning about it, reading books?
No, the exact opposite. In fact, I was fascinated by the memory. I didn't know what it meant. I tried it to tell my mother about it, and she was clueless, right? So I just buried it, but I remembered it. And there was another time when I was in high school. In my last year there, I was in the marching band, and we had come back from a dress rehearsal, and we were changing our uniforms in the changing room. And I was talking to another student, and all of a sudden this little gray comes around my right side, and points a rod to my head and touches my head. And I, pow! The next thing I knew, I was on the floor looking up and being laid down by 4 or 5 grays that had carried me back and positioned me in front of the student that I had been talking to. And everybody in that room was frozen in animation. No, they were all just stopped, as if the VCR had been put on pause. And even people in mid-stride were just not moving at all. Wow. And then the grays took off, and somebody noticed me on the floor, and they came running over to me. Bruce, what are you doing on the floor? And they helped me up. And I looked at the guy that I had been talking to, and I said, "Did you punch me in the face?" And in order to explain how I got on the floor.
Sure.
He said, "No, of course not." And I realized I didn't have, if I had fallen back and hit the floor hard,
you feel it. Yeah,
I have a bump on the back of my head. And if he had hit my cheek, I would have felt that. But there wasn't anything. And then one of the other band members yelled out, "Oh my God, where'd the last half an hour go? I was supposed to meet my mother out front."
Oh my goodness. This is all a classic scenario. I know you're aware of it, but
right.
Boy.
And then I was trying to put this into perspective as to what does this mean? Because I graduated the next year, or at the beginning of the next year, and my French class was planning a trip to France. And we spent this summer in France at Caen, at the University de Caen. And that was a period of my life which is the most extraordinary. I mean, you mentioned in your resume that you've been to, what, 27 different countries, something like that?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm just, I was to, Scotland, France, Morocco, Italy, and that sort of stuff. But that's my limit. But I had all of that. And I even climbed to the top of the Leaning Tower of Pizza. I have a picture of me there. That's pretty amazing.
That's great.
But on the way back, we stopped off at Paris for a few days, and we had a side trip to Versailles. Boy, am I happy I went there. Holy cow. And I walk into the Hall of Mirrors. I had deja vu there. And that's another subject, because I knew I had been there before.
How do you explain that to yourself?
Yes. And I was confused at that point. I was 17 years old at this time. Okay. Now, then we went on to Amsterdam, spent 3 days in Amsterdam. And a bunch of us guys decided to meet in the morning, decide what part of Amsterdam we're going to visit as tourists. And I was standing with them, and I saw this pretty short girl, only 5 feet tall, standing on the side of the entrance way to the American hotel. And when our eyes met, she came over to me and said, "Hi, I'm Maya. What are you doing?" And I said, "We're trying to figure out where to go." She said, "Would you like me to be your guide here in Amsterdam?" And the thought went through my mind, well, you're a lot better looking than these guys. So I agreed. Didn't know who she was, but the things we talked about. And then on the third day, she wanted me to go back to the zoo with her and meet Lyra, Lyra. And we did. And then she said, "Now I want you to take me to my hotel room." So I did. And I said, "Can we correspond?" Because I was really falling for her. She was beautiful and very intelligent. And she said, "No, we can't." And I said, "Why? Why can't we write to each other?" He said, "I don't live here." "What do you mean you don't live here?" I said, "Where do you live?" She said, "In the mountains." And I said, "What mountains?" She said, "The Andes Mountains." Well, and I was puzzled by this. Now, what is important about this is that I didn't make anything unusual out of all of this and who they were until I met Dr. Carla Turner at the Ozark UFO conference.
Oh my gosh, an old friend of mine, may she rest in peace.
Oh God. I'm so thankful I got to meet with her and talk with her. And she was parading Ted Rice around for her new book, A Masquerade of Angels. And guess who The Masquerade of Angels is about? Maya and Lyra, that he met at the Sun Valley.
I haven't thought of that in years.
Sun Valley ski resort. And the whole book is about the events that happened that involved him. Well, that lasted for several weeks with him. It only lasted for 3 days with me. And I finally tried to get a hold of Ted because I was the only one who snuck a picture of Maya. I'm the only one who has a picture of her, photograph. I captured it surreptitiously. And when I tried to publish it on Alien Hub, she finally came to me and telepathically said, "I didn't know you took a picture of me." And I said, "Is this Maya?" She said, "Yes." Oh my God. She knew that I had that picture and that I was talking about her. But I got together with Ted Rice on Alien Talk on a show out of Europe, out of England. And I talked to him on the phone, and I sent to his host the picture I had taken of Maya, and I asked Ted on air, and I have a link to it on my website. And he said, yes, that is the woman I saw at Sun Valley Ski Resort.
Going back to your experiences, looking back on the first one you remembered, others at this point, again, you have a foot in two worlds, growing up in a Baptist background and being a hardcore scientist.
Yes.
What do you think or deduce about the role of the particular other intelligences that you interfaced with? We don't know, but do you venture a theory or a guess or a feeling about them?
I can reduce the amount of uncertainty about what is going on. And that was my primary directive out there in the Wallkill River Valley, just as it was in going to the different Triassic, Jurassic basins and collecting samples, processing them, and doing the paleological sequencing.
Right.
So one of the things I was resistant to, Peter, was the very obvious implications that the craft that were putting on the performances for me were because of my relationship with Bonnie. And it was until after she died and she came back to me and told me who she was, that she was the leader of the Caledonians, and she had been worshipped by the gods and goddesses of Egypt and Sumeria, that it gave me the idea, okay, this is something way beyond, my pay grade, so to speak. And I certainly don't have any, clearance for this kind of information. But one of the things I did discover is that pretty much indirect evidence that this very large population of ETs live underground in the Wallkill River Valley.
Okay, I see. That doesn't really conflict with some of my feelings, I have to say.
And I was contacted by Billy McNamara. He's a Hollywood actor. And his family lived up there near Salt Point, New York. And he said he was seeing this strange craft flying over his house many times. And he had looked at my web pages and he saw pictures of what he thought was the same craft. And he wanted to know if I would come up and to his parents' house, and he would take me out into the field and we'd try to see it if it was the same craft. I did. I went up there and we went out into the field that night, and sure enough, the craft came out of the ground and flew directly over us. And I had beautiful video. It's on the internet. The whole thing is there. You can go to my YouTube channel, and you can.
What is the name of your YouTube channel?
It's YouTube at Bruce Cornet.
Got it. Okay. Do you feel that we're dealing with kind of a dimensional opening, because it's not like in a Flash Gordon movie where a giant rock slides aside, the UFO or whatever comes out and goes back, but indeed, like in Pine Bush, which
I have photographs of the craft diving into the ground, going right through trees and disappearing below the surface.
Okay.
So, and one of the things I did is we had a helicopter ride over the hotspot, and I was shocked to see that there was an Indian mound at that hotspot. Okay. And I had recently read the book by Dr. Susan Martin called The Lost History of the Little People. And in it, she has many pictures of sweat lodges around the world that were pretty much similar in construction. And they had the lodge where they had their visions and, stones that they poured, hot stones they brought in and poured water on it. And then they had the fire on a mound nearby. And that's where they heated up the rocks before they carried them into the lodge. And when we flew over that in the helicopter, there they were. They're a permanent circular crop circle where the lodge was, and the mound, what I call the Indian mound, where the fire would have been built on top of that. And that's where all the we got pictures of the craft coming out of that and going into it, back and forth. So there's no question that there's an underground alien base there, and it's just there's too much evidence to refute it. But
Bruce, when you go to film, do you go with a colleague or do you go on your own? And I have to say, having spent time in the Rendlesham Forest in England at night and other, I guess you'd say, spooky locations after dark, to not just be there, but to capture this kind of thing, it can result in a very special kind of anxiety as well as elation. Your experience is the most memorable out there actually filming in that area?
Yeah. Yes. And then we went back to the same stations again and again. I did a 24 square mile magnetic survey. It took me 3 years. I borrowed a proton magnetometer from Lamont Doherty, and my boss, Paul Olson, was pissed off as hell when he found out that I had borrowed it and was studying UFOs.
Oh,
so, and that survey lit up the whole area of all the magnetic every place where craft were sighted coming out of the ground or hovering over has a magnetic anomaly associated with it. Very significant. So because that Ellen Crystal theorized that in her book, Silent Invasion.
Bless her.
She did an amazing job in getting everything started, and she's the reason why I got involved more than anything else.
A very special colleague and a very special woman for sure, and guts to spare as far as being out there and doing the work, like Carla Turner.
Yes, she was like Carla Turner, and it's so sad. But she died of pancreatic cancer, whereas Carla Turner was liver cancer, I believe.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
continue on.
Well, just wanted to summarize on that, is that I intuited that the Indians had their sweat lodge there because they wanted to communicate with the strange lights that kept on going into the ground and coming out of the ground. They had no concept that these were alien craft, okay? They thought they were probably spirits. They wanted to communicate, and they could communicate with them, and that is why that is there. But here's the key. The Lenni and Lenape Indians that lived in the valley predated European settlers. So this activity was going on for thousands of years in the valley. It's much older than human technology, that's for sure.
Yeah, of course. It all opens up to the same question. Who are they? Why are they here? What do they want? What is their relationship with us? I think the good news is if they were overtly malevolent, we would all know it in no uncertain terms.
Yeah, we would have been eaten by now.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I did discover in the valley because of my magnetic survey, it was one of the first things I discovered, was a buried triangular probe that is only now, erosion has brought it to within 9 feet of the surface. And it's strangely enough underneath the Jewish cemetery. It's because of Ellen and pointing this out that all the UFOs would hover over the top of the cemetery. Why were they interested in Jewish graves? No, they were interested in this huge craft that was embedded within late Ordovician rocks.
Are you saying that trapped in that rock layer below that cemetery is a obviously ancient, advanced triangular craft that they've been able to establish by soundings or what have you?
Yeah, but it was because of the History Channel coming out and doing a piece on it that they brought a ground penetrating radar, and we ran across the edge of it. I had mapped it out based on the fact that every time the constellation Bootes is overhead, and I would go out and constantly take measurements again and again and again, and that's how I learned that whenever the constellation Bootes flew overhead, this triangular probe would fire beams of magnetic energy out into space, and it had a central a beam of information that would go out that was actually seen coming out of the ground right next to the cemetery. And then at the corners of this triangular craft, you would have these solid magnetic beams that were very powerful, so powerful they would there'd be 15,000 gammas on the magnetometer, just like pow, 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 when they would be firing. And I would go right up to them with my magnetometer and I stick the probe into the beam. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there because my instrument would go crazy. And then when they did the ground penetrating radar, I found out that they went down to 27 feet and they hadn't found the bottom of it. So they found the top of it at 9 feet. So 9 from 27 is 18 feet, at least 18 feet thick. And
Bruce, could you read it as an equilateral triangle or another type?
A perfect equilateral triangle, 365 feet on a side, bigger than a football field.
Whoa.
It's huge, absolutely huge. Half of it's underneath the cemetery and half of it is in the neighboring farm field.
Do you feel that the dynamic of you as a very dedicated scholar establishing this with a few colleagues, that, I mean, we're talking here about the find of, the last thousands of years, so to say, if we could establish for the world per se that there it is. Can you, knowing what you do about basic geology of the area, can you even estimate how long that giant triangular craft has been under the earth at that point, or is that an abstract?
Oh, no. The rocks are all age dated, and it's embedded within the black shales, oceanic shales, and it had landed on an ancient island, a granitic island in the valley. That's what I was picking up. The aliens built their bases inside granite masses underneath, and then the black shale, which was laid down in a shallow ocean, was not suitable for underground caverns. Okay, that's my interpretation, but it is age dated perfectly at 400 to 420 million years old. So that triangle landed on Earth during the Silurian 404 to 420 million years ago, before even complex life had existed in our oceans.
What do you think it would take to bring enough attention to this find to, at the least, have one of the big television platforms pick it up with a big budget and go find it? And
you got to realize that nobody's going to be able to dig that up without the government knowing, without the government wanting to survey it and make sure nobody gets away with the information. Now, that's the problem. And do you realize that the first atom smasher, the ground for building them, one of the sites was right there?
No.
The government knew that device was in the ground because it would produce so much magnetic pulses coming out of the ground.
Do you think there's a possibility that the forces that be, in terms of, the first level above top secret scientific establishment, may have set up some kind of simple, discrete tunneling system to get to the surface of at least and be conducting historic, observations and tests?
Oh, absolutely, because and not only that, but I even go so far as to say that they're currently working with the aliens underground. And Billy McNamara over at Saw Point, on the other side of the Hudson River, said that he's seen trucks carrying cargo going down gravel roads and disappearing below ground. And he's seen a latch open up in the horse field across his parents' house, and a human climb out of it, at least it looked human, and then closing the latch and walking away. So yeah, the whole place is with many tunnels. And a friend of mine who worked for the CIA took me up to a bunch of openings or entrances to underground CIA facilities in the area. So it is very, very heavily monitored and by the government. And just to establish credibility to this, which was really funny, you know how the CIA tries to keep everything below ground. Now, they don't want things to be obvious because they don't want people to know what their secrets are. Well, Barbara Hartwell, who I met and befriended out there, she's the one who hosted a TV show in Connecticut for me to show my pictures back in early 1993. And then she shows up in the middle of the road when I went out after that and told me who she was. And this was amazing that, you know, they were monitoring me when I was there and knew when I would be there. And she would show up when I went out, and I didn't tell her that I was going out there, and there she was. But at any rate, I got an email sent through a second or third party thanking me for all the contributions I had made to national security. Signed, Robert Gates.
A former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, to be sure.
Yes. So they liked what I did. At least I think they did. And they may be the reason I got a job out at NIDS, because they said, okay, you've done enough work out there. We want to get you away from your study area. So,
of all of the areas that you have spent time researching, being deeply involved in, and we haven't even talked about how your paleontological work connects directly into the petrochemical kind of world, so to say. Is it, as far as a primary passion in your life right now, would you say it's more around the subject of UFOs in this particular area and the beyond shocking things that are occurring there and historical presence, or paleontology and the study of fossils? Doesn't have to, it's not a question you have to answer, but for me, I could see both passions equally. Again, the love of all things dinosaur related from childhood on, for many of us, it doesn't become a career, but it's something that we remain connected with. And of course, if you're a student of the UFO and UAP and all the implications for humanity subjects, these are two extraordinarily interesting paths to take in life.
Yes, very unusual to be combined, as I like to say.
I think you're the only
looking down. Yeah, I started out looking down at the ground, and then once I discovered my abductions, I was looking up into the sky. So
that says it. Mm-hmm. Any closing thoughts to share before we come to the end of our time?
That triangle I found, in my survey of the area of thousands of sites I went to there, I found 2 more.
Oh my goodness. That size or not quite?
Yes, and it's powerful.
What the hell was happening here?
You know what they were looking at? You know why they're there? We have to go to Franklin Ogden mines in the northernmost New Jersey, right at the New York boundary. The mines that went down there with all those exotic elements that they found in the granites, the Franklin area. Every one of those granite masses that I was studying, including Mount Eve and Mount Adam. Mount Adam to the south is shaped like a pyramid. It's a stepped pyramid. And I even found that the face on Mars there, the Earth face, it's a mirror image of the one on Mars. Oh, and I showed showed my data to Dr. John Brandenburg, and he came back, "Oh, you've blown my mind away. I never would have suspected that you have a duplicate of the Cydonia complex on Mars here in New York State."
That's
Think about it.
That is the perfect place for us to cut off now.
Yes.
Bruce, Dr. Bruce Cornet, thank you so much for joining me tonight and for communicating not just the particulars of your work, but your enthusiasm for it. You have tremendous courage as well as scholarship, and I salute you as you continue on in your quest, my friend.
Thank
Peter
you.
Robbins here, Dr. Bruce Cornet, we wish you well and see you next week.